Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I know your first question is this one name? And yes, this is my full name. Okay. You get points for being able to pronounce it. I'm Brazilian, just to clarify. So if my accent is difficult, please do interrupt me. I'll try to speak as clearly as possible. And yeah, it's my great pleasure to be here today talking to you about EEG and how it can help us detect and treat OCD. So, very important distinction. First, it's EEG, not EGG. It does happen when you're typing and then people make mistakes. Simple difference, but very important. So, what is an EEG actually? And I broke down the word here for you. Electro, which of course has to do with electricity, encephalo, which is basically your brain, and graphy, meaning measurement. So this is the measurement of brain electricity, brain waves. But how do we have electricity in the brain, you ask? Well, our brains will transmit information through electrical impulses that are generated by these nerve cells or neurons. Professor Robbins has shown you an image of one. And these impulses that we can capture from the scalp, they result from large summations of populations of neurons. So a lot of these nerve cells get together in response to an event, which could be paying attention to a task, performing a memory paradigm, or like the habitual task presented by Professor Robbins. And all these events together all these neurons together will fire and give us the signal that can be measured through the placement of electrodes in the scalp. So like in this image here, you're able to see how these neurons are communicating and transmitting this electric impulse. But why would you do an EEG? What kind of information can it bring us? So first reason to do an EEG is very simple. It looks very cool. So you do want to do that just to take this photo. The person is smiling, so that shows you he's not in pain. Those are the tiny electrodes. They are basically, I always say it looks like a swimming cap from the 50s. They just stay in your scalp. They don't read minds. I've been asked that. You can't read your thoughts or anything like that. They just stay there. We apply a little bit of gel just to help the signal be transmitted more easily. Water would do the trick, but it dries fast, so that's why it's simple gel. You can wash your hair afterwards, completely easy to remove. And why are they so important? Okay, I said we can measure electrical impulses, but what can they tell us? So, first of all, simple tasks like thinking, having an idea, or getting your phone to take a photo of those slides, or even just walking. Those things that we never really think about, or we don't even think that we're making decisions, they are all generated by your brain. Your brain decides we are going to get the phone and take a photo of these slides, or we are going to walk. And all of these activities, or these actions, have neural representations, so we will be able to capture them from those impulses produced by the nerve cells. And that is why doing an EEG is very helpful. First, you can imagine that if you're not even aware that you decided to pick up your phone or that you started walking, it's because those tasks, those actions occur very, very fast, in milliseconds. And I'm going to advocate for EEG here because that's my spot and you're stuck with me for 20 minutes. The other neuroimaging techniques provide a lot of information, but they rely on a signal that is transmitted through the blood or neurochemicals. They are not as fast as EEG, which is able to capture these thinking processes within milliseconds, which is how fast it takes us to think or have an idea or start walking. So that's why EEG has this massive advantage, which is being able to capture very fast thinking processes. We are able to see which areas of the brain, where the EEGs have this disadvantage of not being very good at saying where in the brain something happened, because the electricity is spread across the whole head. But nowadays we do have some statistical models that can be used to actually not predict, but have an idea or a clue about where in the brain things happen. But we can actually at least say there's a difference in this thinking process from someone that has and someone that doesn't have OCD. And as you're probably aware of, all of these conditions, they will appear in the brain before symptoms actually show. So by doing an EEG or other neuroimaging techniques, sometimes we're able to see that the brain is working abnormally before you even have symptoms, which means we can actually detect them before it shows and possibly intervene early. And also, as you've seen, it's very safe. It really doesn't hurt at all, doesn't get hot, doesn't produce any shocks. It is very cheap. That's one major advantage, and you can actually, I think Professor Feinberg is going to mention a trial that we've done. I was actually traveling from Cambridge to the clinic in Hertfordshire with the equipment, so we can actually transport it, and it doesn't cost much and has less, like Professor Robbins mentioned, we had to screen participants very carefully for the spectroscopy study. For an EEG, you have less exclusion criteria, so it's very, much more people can participate in. So how do we measure it? Mention like these populations of neurons, they fire in response to an event. These events, we measure them through computer game tasks. So any tasks that are measuring what we're interested in, it could be Tetris for memory, like I believe Margarita is going to talk to us about. So you're sitting in front of a computer playing a task, and each time something happens in the task, it could be an image appearing, or when you press a button to respond to the task, the EEG will mark it, and you see it on the next slide. We'll see a line exactly when something happened to the millisecond precision. And because there are electrodes across the whole scalp, we're actually able to see which electrode capture which different activity. So as you can see here, GOR just means go right. This is a go task, which means participants were asked to press a button. An arrow would appear on the screen pointing either to the right or to the left, and if it points to the right, participants just had to press the right button, and same thing for the left side. So this is just showing when they go to the right, so the arrow to the right, stimulus appeared, and when the response happened, and each individual line represents one of these 128 electrodes that you see in the participant's head. So the participant is attached to that little box there, which is an amplifier of the signal, just playing the game, and the other computer is recording the brain activity. It's very straightforward. And here, I'm just going to leave this with you. Please don't do it now because you get distracted, but this is a demo of a task that we use to actually elicit this brainwave. So if anyone is interested in this QR code, you can get to the task afterwards. But what does it have to do with OCD? Okay, very interesting, but what can we learn from it? Well, we do know that people that have a diagnosis of OCD will show different brainwave patterns than those that do not when performing some of these tasks, like that go to the right or left task. And those differences are actually present in first-degree relatives, so the families that are here, that do not have the symptoms. So we know that you can have those differences and not necessarily have the disorder. And this is quite important because it allows us to see, there's something there, there's a marker that maybe you have the disorder or not, but you are someone that we want to monitor for being at risk. And you all know that OCD, as with many other disorders, the earlier you intervene, the best it is. So this would allow us to actually identify those at risk and start intervention. And I'm going to talk about two brain waves that are particularly relevant, and I was very pleased that they follow nicely from Professor Robbins and Professor Milton talk, which are the error monitoring and, well, I'll leave the rest for when it comes. So error monitoring is what I call the whoops effect. You all have that We all have that. It's when you are doing something and then you accidentally send that email and you haven't finished and you do that. And people actually jump when you're doing the EEG. It's quite fun. Because I have a video of Margarita doing that. Yeah, one day if you bribe me, I'll show you. Yeah, and she was jumping. So why does it happen? Why do we do this? Whoops. Now, Professor Robbins explained this region that called the anterior cingulate cortex, which I'll mention a little bit more, that's responsible for conflict detection and error monitoring. And we all monitor errors. It is essential. That's how we see, boom, I've made a mistake, I need to adapt behavior. That's perfectly normal. So it works as an alarm system. But what we do know, and maybe you will nod or not if we're wrong in this, is that this alarm is a little bit exaggerated in OCD. So it's like, wrong, 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 adapt. And there's this constant feeling of needing to compensate for some sort of error. And this has been linked to anxiety. So one way we can measure this, the brainwave, is called the error-related negativity. Professor Robbins has introduced it already. So it will appear after you commit an error, send that email, press the wrong button when you're playing a game, generated by the anterior cingulate cortex. We've seen that it's a region that is overactive in OCD. It has increased glutamate as well. So we do know that this region is actually working a lot. And as Professor Robbins mentioned, this is another way that we corroborate those findings that, yeah, it is actually, this alarm is a little bit too loud. And this brainwave will appear between 50 and 100 milliseconds after you commit the error. So it actually can be sometimes prior to conscious awareness. Your brain is checking that so that you can fast adapt. So here's an example. The lines are a little bit difficult to see. So we're talking here about the, let's see if I know how to use this wave here, the big one. That's what we're interested in. So you see that it's quite it's quite tall in people with OCD, then in a little bit less in first-degree relatives of people with OCD, and much lower in healthy subjects. So they will still be there, but it's just not as pronounced, meaning in that case, it's working to allow adaptation of behavior. In OCD, it's just like danger, danger, danger in a very inconvenient and threatening way. And why is this relevant? Well, because we know from my colleague Alea Marzuki and I published a review showing that even in children of OCD, this was the most robust finding that we had. So it's something that we can see from the very early stages of OCD, independent of brain development. We do know that it can predict later appearance of anxiety disorders and OCD. So in this study, in these two studies, children were measured before they had any diagnosis, and those that had larger ERNs developed anxiety and OCD. Because it's in this conflict detection region, we know that it's related to anxiety, intolerance of uncertainty, all of those symptoms are you're probably familiar with all of those mechanisms. So, perfectionism and checking, so that could explain why the constant need to check, because you have that error, do it again. And that could be related to this. We still need more research. And there is research showing that interventions targeting error tolerance have shown promise. So this is actually, again, going to the very manifestation. Instead of the whole diagnosis of OCD, we are targeting a specific problem that is happening. The second brainwave that I'm going to talk about is inhibitory control. So it's basically stop. Right? Stop what you're doing and inhibit the action. So inhibitory control represents the ability to control urges, and I'm sure you agree with me, such as those two that you're very familiar with. So the ability to control thoughts and actions, intrusive images, all of those require inhibitory control. We all have intrusive thoughts and perform some sort of compulsive behaviors, but if you don't have OCD, chances are you're a little bit more able to stop doing those when you realize that they are not adaptive or they are not goal-directed. But in OCD, we know that this function is impaired. And one way that we can measure inhibitory control is through this brain wave called the readiness potential, which I call just the go signal, just like in the timer there. So the readiness potential is a brain wave that appears before movement initiation. So when you decide that you're going to start walking, your brain actually has to say, legs, move. You don't really have to think about that. It's really, really fast. So it's prior to conscious awareness, but it exists. Your brain has decided that you should start walking. And it's generated, again, following very nicely from the previous talks, in the supplementary motor area, which we've seen from Professor Robbins' talk, is overactive in OCD. It has increased glutamate as well, and this, and it's the one that is responsible for habits and for saying go. Now, why is this important? Well, research, including my own, has found that that wave that we've seen for the ERN, we can generate a similar one for the readiness potential. It is elevated, so there is a go that's quite strong. And imagine you hear go, and then you want to stop, or you have already started, and you're in that situation. If you don't have OCD, maybe that you can stop like this. But if you have OCD, chances are, once you start, it's very difficult to stop. And this relates to, as you know, compulsions, right? Once they started, the brain has already given the signal, holding the hand there and not doing the task that the compulsion that you started can be quite difficult. We know that this, the magnitude of this, so how high this wave is related to urges. So that each, like, oh, I must do compulsion, it could be because of the magnitude of this. So Professor Feinberg is going to show a study that we've done on how to compensate for some of these motor behaviors. And we do know, because this wave is actually working a little bit more than it should in OCD, it could explain why people with OCD may act based on habits. It's the habitual system. It's prior to conscious awareness. You do it before you think. Therefore, you end up falling back on your compulsions. So, in summary, I think I'm speaking very fast, actually. EEG is quite useful to understand this process because we can measure the very fast processes that you can't with any other techniques, and those specific thinking processes are relevant in the manifestation and the generation of the disorder, and they give us clues as to where you can target. And yeah, of course, it's very tolerable, so we don't really know any side effects associated to EEG. The error-related negativity, so this error detection wave, is a trustworthy marker of error monitoring. So it has been consistently reported as a marker of OCD, and it can predict risk of developing OCD. This important and large readiness potential will help us explain these difficulties in stopping, why it's so difficult to control a compulsion, and will provide a target for intervention, especially in people with high habitual tendencies. Since I have some time, I'll just give you a taster. As Professor Robbins mentioned, that habitual task was associated to increased glutamate in the SMA. We have found, or I have found, I was doing this project with Dr. Marjan Biria, that the wave of the readiness potential, so the brain wave of the goal signal, actually correlated with glutamate. So this is one way that we can also measure. Hopefully one day we'll be able to stratify or classify patients. Yeah, that's my next point. Based on EEG, hopefully this is still the future, but if we since we do have these associations, it may be that we can do an EEG and think, oh, this person seems to have increased glutamate in the supplementary motor area based on this nerve cells profile and this brain waves pattern. Potentially a glutamate drug, GABAergic drug, like Professor Milton was showing us, can be more beneficial, or acting on habitual tendencies, since there is a correlation. We're still not there yet, but we are working towards personalizing treatments, as we know that CBT and SSRIs may not be may not work as well for every single patient. We would like to be able to see from these brain waves how we can actually help each person the way they need. And that is it for me. I do have an Instagram page, which has been a little bit slow recently, but that's on the science behind OCD. So if you'd like to follow that, thank you.
Thank you, that was great. Thank you.